Hey, how's it going? It's March 1st. I'm out here on the outskirts of a little town called Hamilton, Virginia. And as you can see, it's getting close to sunset. It's really beautiful out, very nice. So I wanted to go over a few verses with you guys in Genesis that talk about our world and the constitution of our world, the way that it's made up, this reality that we live in is special. It's not the result of chance or a big bang, but the world that we live in, the reality we find ourselves in, was created by God. It has a special purpose in each of us, and our uniqueness are made in the image of God, and each of us are special and created for a purpose. We turn to the beginning, the first page of Genesis. I'm reading from the NRSV version. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Other versions will say the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. That's a completely legitimate translation also. The Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Prior phrase in Genesis 1:2, the face of the deep. At first, the earth was a formless void. There was no earth. There was no land. But there was the face of the deep. There was the face of the waters that the Spirit of God hovered over. And these waters are very mysterious. An old Greek philosopher, Thales, believed that the world was created out of water. He's not too far from the truth. God spoke everything into existence except the face of the deep, the face of the waters. These waters, as far as we know, had always existed and were in existence with God. And from this foundation, we're going to be able to make some very logical jumps in our consideration of the world. We're going to have a foundation where we start with the face of the deep. These waters that are eternal with God. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. Keep in mind that the sun, moon, and stars had not been created at this time. And yet there is still evening and morning. Keep in mind that it was day and night that were created first, not the sun and moon. There was light created first. Verse 6, God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. Again, I'm reading from the NRSV version. This is what they say. It's not what I'm saying. It's what this version is saying. Other versions will call the word dome firmament, which is a legitimate translation also. But dome is also a legitimate translation. And so we have this body of water, and we have this dome that's created in the midst of this water. As it says in Genesis 1:6, in the midst of the waters, the firmament was created, the dome was created. And it separated the waters from the waters. And so God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. Sky dome. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. Notice here that God does not say it was good. He was in the know that Adam and Eve would sin. And so he created this barrier between his throne and our world, knowing that because we'd be in sin, there would have to be a separation between God and mankind, like a veil between us, that in the day of Christ will one day be ripped apart, as the heavens shall be rolled away like a scroll and taken off like a garment. Verse 9, God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Verse 11, 12, God creates vegetation on earth, trees and plants, and he says that it was good. The evening and the morning were the first day. Verse 14, God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. To recap, God put the sun and moon and stars inside of the dome. This dome separates the waters of the deep, of which we do not know its dimensions or how deep this pre-eternal body of water might be. Nevertheless, the sun and moon and stars were placed inside of the firmament, inside of the dome, to give their light upon this land. Now, we're told by science and modern astronomy that the Earth is a ball traveling around a gigantic sun 93 million miles away, and the sun is a huge ball of gas that is 1 million times bigger than the planet Earth, and that there are 9 planets, if we count Pluto as a planet, orbiting this giant ball of gas in this solar system of empty space that goes on for practically eternity, light years. Can we reconcile this model of the universe with the model of Genesis that I just described to you? Or do we find a conflict? The sun and moon and stars were created to give light on the earth. They are created for us. The sun and moon and stars, if we study them in detail, rotate clockwise above our flat circular earth, of which Antarctica is actually an ice ring that circumvents the flat earth. The North Star, Polaris, stays centered in the sky, and the other stars rotate around it clockwise. The sun and moon and stars were all made to give light for the earth. The sun was made for us, not the other way around. In the Copernican model, with the earth orbiting the sun, it's the sun that is glorified and exalted. It is a very clever, indirect form of sun worship that has been cast upon human consciousness. And most of the world, as you can expect, is completely oblivious to the fact of the shape of our Earth. There are numerous experiments that have been done that prove that the Earth is flat, that when boats disappear over the horizon, they are disappearing beyond the vanishing point of our eyesight and not beyond the curvature of the Earth. And there are numerous places on Earth where we can see landmarks and mountains and all sorts of just different landmarks, different buildings, 30, 40, 50 miles away, lighthouses that would not be able to be seen on a circular Earth because they would be hidden behind the curvature of the planet and would be hidden behind hundreds, if not thousands of feet of rock. It's a known fact that bridges and railroads and canals are not built on a curved surface. They're built on a flat surface. That engineers who build these large railroads and bridges and canals will tell you that this is the case. Also, even for skyscrapers that rise high up into the air, there is a plumb line that is used that would be off even by a few centimeters on the curvature of the Earth. And they are not off. The plumb line is not distorted because we are not on a curved surface. The skyscraper is built on a flat surface, and the plumb line is consistent. Above our heads is a dome. Many speculate that the sun, moon, and stars are a few thousand miles away. I'm not sure exactly their specific distance, but it is certainly not hundreds of thousands, as in the case of the moon. It's certainly not 93 million miles, as is in the case of the sun. And it's certainly not light years in the case of stars. As far as stars go, I want to show you a verse in Job, chapter 38. And this chapter will present us with a little bit more insight into the flat earth on which we live and the dome that is above our heads. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man, and I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. So the earth has a foundation, much like a house. It has a base on which it was founded. This gigantic, circular, flat earth that we live on has a foundation. Verse 5, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? It has a cornerstone. It has a foundation. This doesn't make sense on a circular earth. Cornerstones, they work with a objective value of up and down and left and right, which doesn't exist on a circular Earth where everything is relative. Which way is up? Which way is down? It's relative on a circular Earth. But not so in reality, and not so on a flat Earth in which you and I find ourselves in this reality. Chapter 38, verse 7. I'll go back to verse 6. On what were its bases sunk, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. The morning stars sang. All the heavenly beings shouted for joy. The stars are angels, my friends. They're not balls of gas light years away, as we have been told. They are in fact angels watching down on us. If you've ever seen the movie It's a Beautiful Life, you remember in that film that the stars were angels, and that they were looking down on everyone and watching the stories of their lives. The truth of our world has been hidden in a lot of films and movies, and music, video games. It's been hidden in the culture. In fact, the United Nations emblem is the flat Earth, which is no mistake because they know the true nature of the world. They know that we're living on a flat Earth and that the world is not a globe. Outer space is a hoax. It's a ruse. NASA did not go to the moon. The moon is inside of the firmament. It cannot be reached. It cannot be obtained. The moon landing is a ruse. Think about it. A spaceship leaves Earth at 5,000 miles an hour into outer space, which it cannot change directions. So it can't reverse itself and land backwards. It can't brake from its 5,000 miles an hour. It goes towards the moon, which is supposedly 238,000 miles away, according to NASA, which traverses something about, I think I calculated, 1.5 million miles in orbit around the Earth, traveling around this orbit within a month. I believe I calculated the speed of the moon to be somewhere between, it was like 1,200 miles to 1,500 miles an hour, something of that speed. So it's 238,000 miles an hour. You're in a rocket ship going 5,000 miles an hour. You can't change direction, so you better leave at the exact angle and speed in which to arrive at this ball that's traveling at 1,200 to 1,500 miles an hour, 238,000 miles an hour, miles from you. You're going to travel over the course of about 2 days, 48 hours to get there in the cold abyss of outer space. Temperatures that can get down to almost absolute zero. So the spaceship better be well insulated. You finally get to the moon by chance. By a lucky roulette spin, the angle of the ship was just so that you were able to arrive at the moon, in which your rocket ship traveling at 5,000 miles an hour smashes into the moon which is traveling 1,200 miles an hour to 1,500 miles an hour sideways from you. The rocket ship shatters into 1,000,000 pieces, and the mission is a failure. Some believe that Stanley Kubrick, the director, famous director who directed The Shining and Eyes Wide Shut and other famous films, helped put together the moon landing hoax, and there was hints in his film The Shining where he tried to convey that he had been a part of the moon landing hoax. It is a hoax that has been cast upon the world. Copernicus and Isaac Newton and Einstein and other men in the last 500 years have helped put together this hoax. And of course, all of us have been too busy with our lives to truly check into these things. And think about it. For hundreds of years, the globe ball was put on the desks of elementary kids before we even had the equipment to test whether or not the model of the world that we had developed was even right. I think that, the weather balloon wasn't even created until the 1700s. Men had traveled by horseback up until the late 1800s. And then all of a sudden, in the mid-20th century, we travel to the moon. And we finally get the chance to confirm what we had taught for the last 400 plus years. Think about it. The Word of God says that above our heads is a dome, and that above this dome is the face of the deep, which in Job, it says that the face of the deep is frozen. And I'll find that passage for you. You can look it up for yourself. I'll put it in another video. I don't know off the top of my head. But above this frozen face of the deep that is above this dome is the throne of God. And so heaven is truly above our heads. I pray that God blesses you and that in your journey in the spiritual life, God reveals to you much wisdom, and that the wisdom of the true nature of the world that we live in, the truth about the flat earth, would give you great courage and strength, and that you would know that you are very special in God's eyes, and that we're not on some aimlessly fast-moving ball in the middle of the outskirts of outer space, but that we're inside God's terrarium, and the angels are looking down on us, the stars.